Thank you, Nathan. Well, it is now time for our weekly political segment, KVUE Face Off. And joining me this morning is Sam Robles with Progress Texas and Andy Ho, who is the Communications Director of the Travis County Republican Party. Thank you both for being here with us. So right now, hopefully we know this. People at home know this already. Hopefully they've already voted, but we are in the middle of early voting. It wraps up this week before Election Day, November 5th. And we want to talk about some of the state constitutional amendments, the propositions on the ballot. Particularly, I think the one that most people get confused about is Prop 4. Prop 4 has to do with banning the state from ever implementing an individual income tax. I'm going to let Sam start because this is kind of confusing for some folks, right?
Sure, yeah, and we tend to look at these, the ballot language and get a little confused, but what we're seeing here in Prop 4 is that we're eliminating, if this proposition would eliminate the possibility of an income tax, just to make sure that high earners aren't able to be taxed later on. And what we're looking at with this particular proposition is that by eliminating an income tax in the future, we're actually setting ourselves up to increase the sales tax or the right now we're having a lot of conversations about property tax relief, and so we really want voters to take a look at it. It's not what we need right now, and this needs to be a matter that goes back to the legislature, and that's a conversation that we have as we need it.
So I want to point out that a lot of people, I've gotten, emails and messages, people think that this is saying whether or not the state of Texas will implement an income tax right now. And that is not the case. That is not what this proposition is going to do. This proposition basically states that the state won't implement one unless there's a supermajority approval by the legislature and a vote of the people to implement that. But Andy, the current Constitution already says they cannot implement an income tax unless it's approved by voters. So why is this necessary?
Well, let's look at the Constitution. We're amending it by a vote. The Constitution is several volumes long. It's not like the federal Constitution where it's succinct and this is our holy document. We don't mess with it. But the state Constitution is very amendable, so that's one thing to consider. Secondly, a new tax is a very big decision to make. I mean, very rarely will we start one tax and then get rid of it entirely and get rid of another tax entirely. We don't often swap. We often just start a new tax on top of another tax, and then we're stuck with two taxes. Like we got the Texas lottery several years ago, decades ago now, and that was supposed to reduce the need for the property tax to pay for education. It didn't. We got a lottery on top of our very high, insanely high property taxes. So if we ever do enter into a state income tax, it ought to be by a supermajority, and the people ought to have a say in it too. So yes, it's in our Constitution, but this strengthens it, and I think that's a very wise and prudent move.
Okay, so now I'm gonna push back just a little bit, because one of the things that's interesting about what the current Constitution says about the income tax is that if voters were to even approve an income tax, most of that money would have to go towards education. This takes that away. This doesn't state that.
No, I don't think that's really much of a consideration. The income tax could be directed by the legislature for many purposes, but again, it's going to be a tax on top of a tax, and right now we have too many taxes. We ought to be talking about reducing the size and scope of government rather than greatly expanding it.
Now, Sam, I know you're kind of probably itching to talk about this because the Texas lottery was supposed to decrease, as he mentioned, property taxes pay for schools, and some people argue our property taxes are so high because we're a state that doesn't have an income tax.
That's right. When you look at other states that have a three-piece tax system, so property taxes, income, and sales tax, what you see is a more alleviated for the taxpayer. Right now, we see that balance playing out in property taxes, and overall, our state budget still is not heavily equipped to fund public education the way it needs to be funded, right? And so we understand that this is a conversation that is continuing to happen, that taxpayers are having and lawmakers are having, but we need to bring this back to the legislature, and it needs to be done right. We do not want to eliminate a tax that we will need in the future.
Yeah, another one of the propositions that's getting a lot of attention is Prop 6, and it has to do with CPRIT, the Cancer Prevention and Research Institute of Texas. They want more money before they are set to expire. Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
So we definitely believe that Texas Texas should continue to be the top researcher when it comes to cancer research in this country. We have some concerns with this particular proposition because the agency that oversees this money has had some problems of tracking down the money in the past. And so, again, we need oversight and transparency of where taxpayer money is going. And so we, again, think that this is a proposition that needs to go back to the state.
Where do you stand on this, though, Andy?
Well, I got to say, first of all, no one's against getting rid of cancer. Okay, that's something we all agree on. Maybe there's one person out there, he's crazy. But I think the most important thing to consider here is that CPRIT has had a history of, I would say, corruption. The legislature had to zero out their budget in recent memory. So I think with the sunset coming around, which you mentioned it's going to expire here, I think the next session or the one after, we ought to wait until the sunset hearing to get all the facts out before we go raising billions of dollars for this organization. So let's take a look at all the facts, and right now I'm a no.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the first time on KVUE Face Off that both sides have agreed to on a particular issue. It is a monumental day for sure for us.
Praise God.
I mean, I guess I want to just give you guys a moment to really speak, to folks out there about why they should take this election seriously. And I know this is not a big election, it's not a presidential year, but this still matters, right?
Yes,
right.
It does.
And this is where we're building a habit to vote. And I know that sounds, we're building the habit for the primaries for 2020. And what we're seeing here in Travis County is that we're going to have a higher turnout than the rest of the state. And that's a great place to be, right? And part of that is because of the local propositions that we're seeing on the ballot. But it's really, we're going to see the most immediate impact when we're able to enter in these local elections.
All right, Andy, any final thoughts for viewers?
Yeah, again, it's very important that we vote. These elections affect your life the most directly. It's extremely important to get out and vote. This is your way to be heard. And unfortunately, it is one of the lowest attended elections. So get out there, read about it, look on either party's websites. I'm sure we all have good information, and make an informed decision. And when in doubt, leave it blank.
All right, and you can always go to KVUE.com/VoteTexas, where we have a whole comprehensive series about every item on the ballot.
Yes.
All right, we thank you both for being here with us this morning. If you guys missed this, you can rewatch it on KVUE.com.